I did a show when I first became director of the Art Museum at Carnegie-Mellon. And I thought it would be fun in this explosion of figurative German art and neo-expressionism, blah, to do a show on, well, what is happening with abstract art. It wasn't like looking for formalism, or it was really trying to see what is out there. Sharon Gold was in that show. A lot of interesting people, and their work was very dissimilar.
No, we're starting now, right now.
Oh, we are, but
we're
they're
on.
not going to have all this.
Oh
blah,
no,
blah.
we'll get rid of all the stuff we talked about.
This is the blah, blah.
The blah blah Corona worries. Yeah, so we're filming this during a Corona time frame. It's a pandemic, right?
Yeah, it's serious.
Yeah, it's a very serious time, and but thankfully, I have Elaine King here, who happens to be in town, getting out of the East Coast coldness, and
that was mostly why we came, and we have friends here.
Yeah,
lots of friends.
And it beats being on the East Coast when you're shut down.
Yes, and we take trail walks every morning. Yeah. Not this morning, but I will this afternoon, and we've done some really nice ones because you're outside, you're moving, you're seeing beautiful things, and you're not getting cabin fever.
Yeah, that's right. And how about the art? There's not a ton of art to see here. There's no art right now to see other than Medicine Man Gallery, and not really much there right at the moment.
Well, no, Julie Sassy has curated a fabulous show.
Oh, I know. I was there, but I mean, everything's shut down.
But I saw it.
Oh, you got to see it.
I got to see it.
Yeah, that was a fantastic show. I agree.
Which I think she did I think in general she does a fabulous job.
Yes, and she was on the podcast. I don't know if you heard hers.
No, but she does a good job. She's got a good eye.
Oh, yes, she does.
And she's a very serious person.
Well, you're a very serious person, too. I mean, I was reading your Wikipedia page, and you've done a lot. You've curated over 50 exhibits, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? You grew up, you were born in Illinois?
Oak Park.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent my childhood there. And then I went away to college nearby in northern Illinois.
But let's just, before you jump all that way to college, because there's a lot in between, were you interested in art as a little kid?
I wasn't particularly interested, but we had parents who were interested in culture, and we had field trips every month. Uh-huh. We'd go to the different museums and museums of science and industry, and my father was a music buff, classical music buff, and we had books in the house, and I loved going to the Art Institute of Chicago. Mm-hmm. I was actually going to be a lawyer.
What was your dad? What did your dad do?
My father was a CPA.
He was a CPA. And your mom?
My mom was basically trained in dress design in Europe, and then she just became a housewife.
Yeah, so she
very
had
traditional of her era.
Yeah, except the first part was very untraditional, being it was a dressmaker?
She really, yes, she studied in Prague, and she studied a little bit in New York when she first came. She's Central European. And then she worked out of her own home. My mother could see a dress, let's say I'd like something in the windows of Saks Fifth Avenue, and I'd show it to her, and she'd say, oh, I can make that. And we'd go and get a Vogue pattern, and she'd adapt it, and there I'd have my dress.
Did she ever feel like she didn't quite get to do what she wanted as far as that creative outlet? Or
no.
She enjoyed what she did?
She liked us.
Yeah. And how many siblings were there?
I had 3 brothers, and 2 are deceased.
And were any of those in arts at all?
No. One was a engineer, and the other was also a CPA, and then he became a priest.
Oh, wow.
And the youngest brother writes poetry, and he had his own contracting business.
So there is a creative bent clearly that runs through your family.
Some, I'd say, more of a creative searching and
wanting to answer questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the CPA part never entered your mind that you would do that. Lawyer was really what you first thought you were going to do?
Well, it's because I was captain of my debate team, and the dear sisters of my private girls' school thought that was my calling.
I see. And so what year did you, so you went to Northwestern? Is that where you went to school?
That's my PhD, but I went to Northern Illinois, which was a state school, mainly because my father felt I should take scholarships to Marquette University or Mundelein, and I wanted to go to Radcliffe, and he didn't want to pay for it. So we compromised, and then I went to Northwestern.
Yeah, my parents were like the same. Go to the state school. You got a full scholarship. Go there. And so,
Well, I didn't have a full scholarship. I had full scholarship to all these Catholic universities, but I had had enough of Catholic schools by the time I was a senior in high school.
'cause that's where you went. Your high school was Catholic schools?
And grammar school.
Yeah. And so when did you graduate from high school?
I think, let's see, 1966.
So right at the height of almost the height of the Vietnam War in 66. It was really starting to kick off.
Yes, but I was more oblivious.
And your brothers weren't involved in any of that?
No. My one brother, because he was so good in engineering, he worked for a company called Helicrafters, which became then Nordstrom. I forget the name what they are, but they sent him over to Thailand, and he had a deferment because he was more valuable working with a major government company than being in the field.
But you were part of the 60s.
I never really was, quotes, a flower child.
Yeah, okay, I want to know this. I mean, you're right in that area. You could have easily gotten to Woodstock and all that.
No.
No interest. That was not your path at that point.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. I mean, I was empathetic. I supported things, but I was a pretty straight shooter kid.
Yeah. Well, your dad's a CPA.
Well, no, it was just, I think who I was. In general, people say to me, okay, what's your politics? And I say, well, in general, I'm an independent.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of a moderate person. I weigh the benefits and the costs.
Yeah.
And I make my decision. I'm not an ideologue.
Yeah.
So
I want to get into this a little later when we talk about the Mapplethorpe exhibit that you had to take over in Cincinnati.
It was post.
Yeah,
post.
But I mean, that maybe that ability to be the moderate and right down the line helped you in that.
Yes and no.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but when we get there.
It also applies to the arts today.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. So you start as a lawyer, or you think you're going to go into law, and how long did it take you to say, maybe this isn't exactly what I want to do?
My junior year in college, I had been a political science and American history major, and I just began to get bored with learning only these case studies. Mm-hmm. And I'd come back to Chicago, and there was a very exciting museum there at the time. It was called the Museum of Contemporary Art. It was just opening, and a really innovative director was there, Jan Vandermark, put on amazing shows. And I used to go with my friends, and they used to say to me, look how excited you get about all this stuff. You never talk about your law cases that way. And I began to realize, maybe they're right. But I remain interested in American history, and I do remain interested in policy. And my master's degree was in art history and public policy, which I think has helped me understand how the arts work, which contribute back to balance.
So balance is the key.
I think balance to everything is when people say, oh, you shouldn't drink coffee. Oh, you shouldn't drink this. And I say, how many cups do you drink a day?
Yeah.
I drink 2. I don't think that's obsessive. How many this or this? I said, well, I do X, not Y. So
yeah, I think, if you think about the Navajo, the Dene, They look for Hozo. They look for balance, peace within, steady state. So there's something to be said for that, I think, in all things.
I think if we can find, I just retired a year ago, and it'll be 2 years this summer. I look at this as a period of refinement. You seek what nourishes you. You get rid of junk. You get rid of stress. And then you become happy. I continue to write. As a matter of fact, during this self-containment, quarantine, isolation, I just finished a review for Sculpture magazine about this wonderful artist I saw in Iceland. Her name is Shoplifter.
Is that her last name, or is that her first name, Shop and Lifter?
No, it became because she was being interviewed, and the person who was interviewing her couldn't pronounce her name because Icelandic names are difficult.
They are difficult.
And then when they called her Shoplifter instead of her full name, she said, "Oh, I like that," because she has a quirky personality.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And so she took this nom de plume and liked it.
And that's who she is.
And she represented Iceland at the Venice Biennale.
When was this?
2019.
In 2019.
And then when I was in Reykjavik last month, I saw a recreation of this amazing installation, which was 3 rooms. And I wrote to my editor from Reykjavik. I said, Twileen, can I write a piece about this? And she said, yes, we love her work. And while I'm here in Tucson, I wrote it.
So did you fly out to Reykjavik just to go see the sculpture or you just happened to be there? Or?
I just happened to be there.
And you go, here's an opportunity to make a mark on somebody that you see as being an important person.
Well, and I think the art world is seeing her as an important person because she's so creative and experimental. And this ties into having serious issues that she's concerned with. She's concerned with vanity and beauty in our society, how it's overblown. She's concerned with our planet. But when she makes a piece, she doesn't hit you over the head with dogma and narrow messages.
And what's the imagery of what is it, if you can describe
it? She created this 3-room cave where you enter one, which is dark, and it's made from organic hair. The whole thing is covered floor to ceiling. The first room is very dark.
And what kind of hair?
Synthetic hair that they would make for
wigs and things.
Yes, and toys and dolls.
I got it.
And it's a subsuming environment. The first one's dark. The second one is very bright and colorful, like you would be on a Kool-Aid acid test with bright primary colors. And then the third one is subdued, very delicate pastels. And you're like on a journey. And I equated this with Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, as if when you enter her installation, you're falling down the rabbit's hole.
Yeah.
And when you fall down the rabbit's hole, you lose control, and you should just go with the unexpected experience.
And how long did you take to go through an exhibit like that?
I gave myself probably 12 minutes for the 3 rooms. There's a bench, you can sit down. And there's also sound permeating the place by a cult metal band who designed the sound for her called Ham. And it resonates.
And was it the same sound in each room, or did it change?
No, it changed.
Each one was a little different.
I
would think it would, because sound, smell, taste,
exactly,
all those things, humidity, are all very important.
Exactly, and she's very aware of sensory experience, and you do, if you allow yourself, you walk through this, and you feel it. And her curator of that pavilion for Venice made a wonderful comment, because she calls her piece Chromo Sapiens. And Greta, and sorry I can't pronounce her last name, said, you enter Chromo Sapiens as a Homo sapien, but you leave as a Chromo sapien because you've been bathed in all this color. Yeah. But this color also echoes the northern lights of Iceland, and it also echoes that cavernous, very rough landscape of Iceland.
It's like an amniotic trip through primordial humanity.
It was wonderful.
Interesting.
It was.
Now, how does a person like that make a living in the sense of, can you sell something like that to a museum? Or how do they? I've often wondered, artists that do these big installation pieces, how do they make a living?
I don't know, but I know she does drawings and she does paintings. So probably that's what sell. But people are really responding to her, and she's now living in Brooklyn. So she goes back and forth, but she's been really affected by the Iceland landscape. And for me, having spent 8 days there, helped me really enter her piece. Because I saw it on my last day of being in Iceland, in Reykjavik, and I was very touched by it, because I went all over with 3 friends to see Iceland. We had hoped to see the Northern Lights, but we didn't. The cloud cover didn't allow.
Yeah, wouldn't allow.
But it was still a wonderful experience, and the people there are fantastic.
And you got to write an article about somebody, and maybe help change your life.
No, I think she's already going. I think
it all changes, though, because let's think about it. It's really just a puzzle piece, right? So you go there, you see it, you call your editor. She says, yeah, you do it. Then you come here, you talk about it. We get it on the podcast. Who knows where that goes?
Well, I hope so, because I think she's a good artist, and I love celebrating good artists.
Yeah, I agree. But I want to get back a little bit, because we jumped ahead. Because we haven't talked about when you went to get your PhD. And finally, what you actually graduated college at. What was your final degree in college?
Which one? Which degree?
Your first degree.
It was in art history and American history.
And then from there, you went to Northwestern?
Yes.
And decided you would get a PhD. Now, your PhD is in 2 fields, isn't it?
Correct.
Yes. And tell me about that. I thought that was interesting.
I did a cross degree in the School of Speech, where I studied interpretation and theory and art history. And I liked having this larger context than just art history, because art is not made in a vacuum.
Well, tell me about speech. What is that part of the
Well, I took courses in interpretation, how you interpret culture and the arts. One of my most important teachers was Stuart Kaminsky, who taught film, and I took a couple courses with him in understanding how a film is made. And I loved it, because I'll remember for one of my projects I had to dissect Phantom of the Opera.
Oh, wow.
And that was wonderful. And I think as a person in the arts, I see myself as a contextualist, because I know art history, I know American history. I've delved into some understanding of film, and it gives you, I think, a broader base. I am not a theorist. I never bought into critical theory, even though I think it's important to know. I think you need to know who some of the key theorists were, but I think some people get so subsumed with it that they fail to see the art.
Yeah, they can't see the whole picture because they're so pinpoint focused.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So then, from Northwestern, I got a job. Prior to Northwestern, I was the co-director of a women's cooperative gallery called Artemisia in Chicago. And I also began curating shows because before I got my PhD, I was hired by Northwestern to teach the history of photography, as well as I taught a studio class in basic photography because I had taken a few courses in that. And then...
Were you making any of your own photos for yourself at that point?
I've made photos, but I don't see myself as an artist.
Why not?
I just don't think I have that in my bones or my blood. I'm good at color. I'm good at looking at space. You know, if you want to redesign your house, I could probably give you a lot of suggestions.
Yeah.
But I don't think I have that inner voice, the need that a real artist has.
Yeah, I think that's the key. I think it's that need, that drive that you have to create.
Which I don't.
Yeah, I understand that.
But I have the need to write.
Yeah. Well, that's an artist.
I love writing.
Yeah, that's an artist.
And I love the challenge of writing because I stare at this blank screen and I say, okay, what are you going to say? And then I make notes. I read other things about the person. And then when it's finished, I surprise myself because I don't go there with any pre-existing assumption. I just let it unfold.
You mean you create?
I don't know if I say I create. I just write. I just write.
That's creating. You're creating that, that moment in your mind. I guarantee it's all coming from some guttural place where you're thinking about the space, the setting. When you were doing the Icelandic article sitting in Tucson, Arizona, I can't imagine you weren't thinking of the crags and the hills and the smells.
But I have to say, being in Tucson, I was saying to my husband when we're driving around, we went up to Mount Lemmon, and I said to him, what's wonderful about Tucson? Its scraggy mountains are analogous to Iceland.
Yeah.
Except there's no ice and snow.
Yeah, I would believe that.
and
we don't have trolls.
No trolls. You have other things.
Gila monsters. And we do have
and those big wild pigs.
Yeah, javelinas.
The javelinas. I have a family that visits my house every morning.
So you finished this. So you're working with this co-op doing this, and then where do you go from there?
When I was a co-director,
yeah,
I was hired by Northwestern. I ran a panel on photographic collecting. With some of the major players in Chicago. And one was Arnold Crane, who passed away. I think part of his collection is now in Tempe and the Met. David Travis, who was a primary curator at the Art Institute. 2 or 3 other collectors. And I was moderator. I put this together.
What does that mean exactly when you say moderator for it?
Well, you field questions between the panelists. You field questions between the audience. You do an introduction as to why you wanted to do this panel.
Yes, okay. So you were making panels and you were acting as the moderator in photography.
Yes.
Okay. I thought this was some kind of a thing where you were actually helping the collectors with selections.
Oh, no. I wasn't an advisor. This was just an event at the gallery. And it turns out the night a panel took place, the head of the School of Art at Northwestern heard it. And he came up to me and gave me a card and said, call me in the morning. And I did. And he said, would you come for an interview? We're looking for a person to teach photography and photo history. And I was on a special grant with Artemisia that the funding was going to disappear anyway. So I took the job. It was a 50% time job, but it paid more than my other job. It was doing more of what I was interested in. And I started to teach there. And then I became interested in curating shows. And there was a gallery at the University Center, and they let me have space. I did a show of women in photography
Was Dorothea Langen involved in that one? Do you remember?
Imogene Cunningham was.
Yeah, okay.
And she was wonderful to work with. And then...
so you were only working with living artists at that point, right? For the photography of women?
Yes.
Okay.
And then I had a show of quilts. And we had a wonderful dean of the College of Fine Arts. His name was Rudy Weingartner, who loved art and collected art. And I went to his office and I said, we need some money to do some exciting shows on this campus. Now they have the Block Gallery, but this was prior. So I said, we need to bring art to this campus. And he agreed, and he listened to the proposals. And every time I had a show, he gave me several $1,000s. And I realized I loved doing this. I also created a lecture series. And I laugh in advance because this was in like 79, 80, and I was bringing Hans Haacke, Douglas Hubler, Sia Armanjani to our campus. And it was fun. And then when I wanted to get my PhD, I had to be working 60% time to get tuition remission. So by running the lecture series and teaching, I fulfilled that. So I was able to have my tuition for my PhD completely waived.
And what was your PhD in?
It was in the School of Speech and Art History.
Oh, your dissertation, I mean.
My dissertation was on the National Endowment for the Arts and how it influenced the art of the 70s.
And how did it?
Well, if you think about it, and this is, most people look at me, and this is true though, the National Endowment for the Arts, under the reign of Nancy Hanks, which sadly now is the Trump Hotel, which is the old post office, worked under Richard Nixon. And while Richard Nixon did not love the arts, he did not want to look like a Philistine. He really understood Nancy Hanks, and she knew how to work the Hill. She knew that the states benefited, because look at all the programs states got because they got a huge chunk of money. So if you were a kid in Boise, Idaho, or in Clifton, Iowa, but you could be in a band, your school would get money to do a better theater production. And this is one of the reasons, even under our current president, our senators don't want to kill the NEA, because they know their states are benefiting. But to go back to the point, Nancy Hanks, under her realm, more than quadrupled the budget for the NEA. And most people don't know that today, the budget of the NEA is equivalent to about what it was in 1980.
Wow.
So when you think about how much
with inflation,
we've lost with inflation,
30%,
it's a pittance.
Yeah, 30,
it's
40%.
A pittance.
Yeah.
So I tried to get this book published, and no one wanted to publish it.
This is the dissertation?
Yes, and I've done several rewrites of it, and I've updated it. But you see, it doesn't have a political angle. It's an analysis.
Yeah.
It's not a slant. And when I tried to get it published in the 90s, people were saying, there's not enough in here about Mapplethorpe. There's not, and I kept saying, this isn't about that.
Yes.
This is about the impact of the NEA in the 70s, because it allowed artists to get grants. Now, today, when we think of an artist getting $7,500, that's a pittance. But in the 70s, that was a lot of money. It also was a seal of approval, because if you went to your State Department then and applied for a grant, and you had an NEA grant, you were looked at differently. Or private people would look at you differently. And there were a lot of artists, critics, curators, museums, collectors who benefited. I was excited about that. And this brought together my interest in history, policy, and the arts.
Well, this might be a good segue, actually, talking about grants and NEA and the Mapplethorpe, to talk about that. So for those who don't know, maybe you can explain a little bit what happened. I actually remember when all this went on with the Cincinnati Art Museum and all the hubbub when Robert Mapplethorpe's photographs came out, which were quite provocative. But that was under a grant, wasn't it? Wasn't it funded partially?
It's a joke.
Yeah.
The Philadelphia Institute of Contemporary Art received a grant for $25,000 to help produce that show. Now, think about it. They did this show in 1988. Now, they had to raise a lot more money to put that show together. But if you really assess it, which David Ross did, who used to be the director of the ICA in Boston, who took the Mapplethorpe show, did a economic analysis. They figured out that each taxpayer was paying less than a penny to support that show.
Mm-hmm.
And when that show opened, he stood outside the ICA in Boston. And if anybody grumbled, he gave them back a nice, shiny gold penny and said, "I'm sorry you used this money, but take it back." But see, he was clever. When I came to Cincinnati after the whole explosion.
Tell them about the explosion for the people who don't know, because a lot of people may not understand or know about Robert Mapplethorpe.
Well, a man named Dennis Berry took the show, and it opened. But you have to understand the location of the Contemporary Arts Center in Cincinnati. It's right across from Covington, Kentucky,
yes,
which is the heart of the Midwestern Bible Belt. Also, a man who was a good friend of, I'm forgetting his last name, Senator Helms.
Senator Helms, yeah. Jesse Helms.
Jesse Helms was a very close friend with the man who owned Kroger stores. And they were programmed to attack this show. Now, when the show opened, people went ballistic because of a few of the pictures. And when I came and they asked me publicly, would you have taken this show knowing what you know? And I said, oh, yes, I would have taken the show, but I would have handled it differently. First of all, knowing I'm in a conservative community, I would have prepared my public for what was coming. I would have had some articles in the newspaper. I would have tried to get public television to let me talk about it. And I would have installed it differently. Number one, if you've seen the book or you've seen the show, there are these portraits of him, self-portraits, and he was a very gorgeous, handsome man in his prime. But if you took at the entranceway and you lined up these 10 portraits where he goes from being this incredibly looking young man.
Yeah, vibrant,
till he's standing there and he looks like a ghost.
Dying of AIDS.
With the staff with a skeleton on it. You would understand something immediately. Number two, I would have put all those pictures that are the X-rated pictures,
right.
X-Files, in one room.
Yeah.
And you put up a little sign and say, the material in this room could be inappropriate for children or for some viewers. Please be advised and step here with this information.
Yeah, when I saw that show, they had done that, actually. They had set that up. I think it was in the Guggenheim when I'd seen it. This was a group of Mapplethorpes, and they had just like that. And yeah. I think they had a curtain as well.
Yes, and I did that too in Pittsburgh when I showed Ida Applebrug's work. There was one video that could have been disturbing, so you put it in its own container, and then you alert people. And if you're there with 3-year-olds or 6-year-olds, they're not going to go in there.
Right.
You're not censoring the work. You're being responsible. However, the Contemporary Arts Center in Cincinnati suffered greatly.
Because they did none of this. They just opened the show, they
Yes.
hung it all, and you could come in. Anyone could come in. And so what was the backlash at that time?
Well, Dennis Berry went to jail for a day. But fortunately, the people in the community rose above that. And when they were trying to prosecute him, there was a group involved with the conservatives saying, you don't need to see that show. And the jury said, no, we cannot pass judgment on something we do not see. And they went to see it, and he was acquitted, which was good.
Was it obscenity laws that he was being tried for?
Yes.
Yeah.
Polluting the visual public. And for the most part, except for a few pictures, and even with those X-Files with the little kids looking a little pornographic, kids are really little exhibitionists. I mean, come on. I mean, you were projecting and reading things into that. And if you wanted to like isolate it, fine, do it. But I think and this was, I went on public record saying, you have to know what the foundation will hold if you're building a house. You cannot build a house on a swamp made of cement. You might be able to get away with bamboo or cloth, but you're not going to have granite or cement. And if you want that, then you better prepare your foundation.
Yeah.
And that's what I talk about, alerting your public. And I think in anything like that, don't censor, prepare.
Mm-hmm. And you took over that position running that museum after.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
And I call it the job from hell.
Yeah, tell us about that.
My good friend, who's deceased, sadly, Charlie Miller, who was deputy director of Art Forum, begged me to take the interview because I had been nominated for that job. And I went for the interview, and they liked me, and Charlie kept saying, you're the only person who'll be strong enough to do this. So I went to my chairman, and I got a 3-year leave of absence from Carnegie, and I took the job. It was very difficult because a lot of the really good board members resigned. The institution was bankrupt. Because of lawyer fees and everything to defend the institution. Every local foundation from PNC Bank on withdrew their grants. And so you had an institution operating at zero, hardly budget. And there are other issues which I don't want to go into professionally. It was very difficult to turn that institution around. I had a good chairman of the board, Tony Cavada, who was very dedicated. There was another wonderful woman who just died, Alice Weston, and her husband, Harris, continued to be supportive. And the original founders of the institution were these wonderful women, Jewish women, who I got to know and cultivate, who came to the aid, including a man named Tom Schiffler. And slowly, one was able to turn things around, but it was a very difficult position. And then any of you who've worked with boards are not easy to deal with. Things don't happen fast enough. Plus, I'm not a radical. So I was supposed to be doing things lickety-split.
Yeah.
And that's not my style.
Yeah.
And after 2 years, I resigned. And I was glad to go back to my other job. I, as a matter of fact, because of that, never became interested in being a director of a museum again and just did freelance work.
And at that point, before you took a job like that, you had considered, okay, this might be my path. I'll be a museum director for
Yes.
different museums, work my way up to even very significant museums.
I don't know. When I was there, I was also curating, and this is the conversation I had with Julie Sassy about how much better it is to be a curator than to be a museum director.
I would think so. I would think it'd be a million times better.
I
Personally.
think you're more engaged in creative problem solving. You're not having to be constantly chasing money. Also, I don't have a poker face.
Mhm.
And I think it's a requirement to know how to deal with the board successfully. I think a man is a genius, and he likes it, and he's successful, and I respect him, is Richard Armstrong at the Guggenheim. I just don't know how he does it. He does things seamlessly, like silk. The man has a great eye because he came from the Whitney being a curator. He was a curator at the Carnegie Museum of Art, and he's been at the Whitney for at least 12 or 15 years. But I don't have that finesse. Usually you kind of know what I'm thinking on my face. I don't have to say anything, and you know. And once you become aware of that, you shouldn't go there.
Well, maybe you're just more passionate about things, and that passion shows through. I think a good curator, a good art critic is very passionate about what they're doing. And sometimes you can't, hold back passion. I say to people sometimes when I buy things, I'm that same way. I get excited. I don't go, this is, you're going to know if I like a piece or not immediately. There is no poker face that I have for buying or selling.
Well, I just had a wonderful experience here in Tucson, and I hope more people become aware of her. Her name is Julie Agulio. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. She lives here in Tucson, and she also has her studio in Bisbee. She's part Apache and part Hispanic, and she's doing some wonderful work dealing with the disappearance of Native American women
It's a huge
and
problem.
children. And I saw a few of her pieces at her studio. And then we went to another small gallery in Bisbee, and I immediately liked one of her collages, and we bought it.
Oh, very good.
Because there was a visceral connection.
Mm-hmm.
And this is partially, I think, we need in good curating and not over-the-shoulder curating. And what I mean by that, some curators only include work because it was at the Venice Biennale or in the Whitney or in the X or is in Y gallery.
Right, headhunters.
And not looking at the work. And taking, and risk is another part of it. When you really are hunting for interesting work, there's risk. And I could tell you a wonderful story about a show I did at Carnegie-Mellon.
And that's a place where you end up being a professor and working for 36 years?
33.
33 years.
Well, and I'd say by the time you take off my leave of absence for 3, and I was a fellow at the Smithsonian American Art and then another at the Portrait Gallery, plus sabbaticals. I probably was there teaching 27, 28 years. On and off, I'd take breaks because I needed a change of environment.
Right. To rejuve your creativity.
Yeah. And, but I think story I love is I went to John Weber's gallery in New York, and I needed a small show to fill a room in conjunction with Jill Gigerich's show. She's a good artist in LA area. And I went into John Weber's gallery, and there was these wonderful shadow boxes, and all you saw was a black box, and then you have to look in the little hole, like the falling down the rabbit hole.
Right.
And I went through this work, and now the artist's name escapes me. And I went to John and his wife, and I said, "Oh, is this work available after the show?" And I knew her name, and he said, "But don't you want to see her resume? Don't you want to know who's written about her? Don't you want to know where else she's shown?" And I said, "No, I don't care. This is good work."
Yeah.
I said, "I just want to show the work. I don't need her resume. I don't care if she went to RISD or Harvard
Right.
or Cal Arts. The work is there. You can see a lot of stupid work that went to these schools. Let's show the work." And they packed it up and let me show it.
I'm sure they did. But there must be a lot of curators out there that are just the opposite. They look at the resume before they even look at the work.
I can't speak for anybody. I just know what I see, and or people are now blinded by ideology. And what I mean by that is we're in an era, and I know this maybe is old-fashioned, but it's okay. I have a foot in the 20th century, and I've got a good foot in the 21st century. Ideology, gender, identity, race, critical critique of society. And that becomes the issue for putting a show together. Now, sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. Oftentimes, it does not. And I'll go on the record and say this. I was horrified by the new installation of the Museum of Modern Art. Even though many people are waxing poetic and singing praises, it was the most jumbled, confusing installation I ever saw in my life. Did I understand some of the reasons behind it? Yes. Did it work? No. Halfway through, I said to my friend Jack, I really seen enough. I'll have to come back here again, but my brain is scrambled. I can't handle this anymore. Now, what was wrong? Context, juxtaposition, inferior artists being put next to masters. And, it's not a nice thing, right? In an age of equality, we should say something is mediocre. But if it is mediocre, why is it there? I just saw a show at the Phillips, and I'm on the process this week, and I'm going to have it done before I leave Tuesday. I'm reviewing a show called Riffs and Relations, something like the influence of modernism on African American artists. It's not a good show.
And what makes it not a good show?
The hanging selection of works and the absence of some really good artists, such as Carrie Mae Weems, Sam Gilliam, Adrian Piper, and too much focus on the body. But when we think about modernism wasn't about figuration.
Just the opposite, really.
It was the liberation, yes, to break rules, shift things around. I agree with that. But when a show focuses so much on the body, you're, can you say, cutting your nose to spite your face?
Mm-hmm. And was that on both ends, both on the modern art that they're comparing it to the contemporary artists? They were both show the artists that they're showing in juxtaposition of this in this show.
Well, there were great artists in
primarily?
the show, but some of the artists were imitating the masters. Now, I'm not in agreement that we should be showing a white, lily white. But since the 80s, there are so many great African American artists, from Taser Gates, David Hammonds,
Leonardo Drew.
I mean, I could make you a list of 20 artists. I'm reading now the curator's essay to try to really steep myself in her intention, and I'll finish that today before I start writing, because I really want to get in her head. But to me, this is a case in point where identity and ideology could be blinding. It's my humble opinion.
And so this brings up a point for me, and that's being an art critic, because you do this professionally and you've done it for a while. I find it to be a very, first of all, I don't know if I could do it. I don't know if I have the ability to do this profession. But I'm curious how you go about critiquing a show, because going in, you have to be a referee, is what you have to. And I guess I was a referee in college, so I did do that. So maybe I do understand it better than I think. But you have to be a referee in the sense that you have to you have to wear no blinders. You have to call it as you see it, regardless of the outcome. And that has to be tough sometimes, because these could be friends, colleagues, professional individuals, people of power. And if you destroy or give a negative review, it can affect them, right?
Well, number one, I don't review shows of friends.
Okay.
Number two, when I curate, I don't include friends, or if I do, I always mention something as a disclaimer.
Yeah, you give a disclaimer.
I would not review colleagues at Carnegie-Mellon, much to people's chagrin. I'm too close.
Right.
And when you say you don't enter any show neutral. We all have a bias.
It's true, we do.
We have a bias, no matter how you want to say you don't, you have it. I know exactly my aesthetic. And sometimes when I turn myself off, I have a conversation with myself and say, stop it. You have to look again. Now, if I really am appalled or just don't like it, and I did that last fall, I did not find the last Carnegie International a stimulating show. Halfway through, I went to the cafeteria and I called my editor again, and I said to her, I can't review the show, get another writer. Because I said, I don't want to write a piece where I'll just be negatively ranting. The show for me doesn't warrant my time. Why? Again, it was a jumble. There was a lot of mediocre work, even though there were some really good artists in it, like Mel Bachner. But there were other things that just didn't work. So,
what makes a good show?
It all depends. I just think...
Does it start with the premise of the show to begin with?
I think there has to be a good narrative.
Mm-hmm.
I think the curator has to be open in trying to... A good show is a problem. It's problem solving. You come up with a concept. When you're doing a retrospective of one artist, that's different. If you're doing a group show, you have to say, okay, I did a show when I first became director of the art museum at Carnegie-Mellon. And I thought it would be fun in this explosion of figurative German art and neo-expressionism, blah, to do a show on, what is happening with abstract art. And I did a show called Abstraction. And I did a selection of Sam Gilliam. Mm-hmm. It's another fine African-American artist, who, by the way, is not in the show at the Phillips. the abstraction was very diverse. There wasn't one kind of abstract art. I had David Reed in it. I had Emily Chang. I had Stephen Westphal. I had Kathy Montgomery, who was a regional artist of Pittsburgh. The work was very different. But what you were trying to do is take and stretch what is happening. And then I used as an anchor Sam Gilliam's work as a earlier modernist abstractionist in juxtaposing with all these emerging younger people. And it wasn't like looking for formalism, or it was really trying to see what is out there. Sharon Gold was in that show. A lot of interesting people, and their work was very dissimilar. Another thing I believe in, don't do a group show with one example.
What do you mean when you say that?
Your audience can't comprehend enough to see one picture. If you have two
I got
or
it.
three,
You need to have a
you're
compilation
giving them,
of the...
yes, they're beginning to see how this artist thinks. One individual picture is not enough.
I agree with that.
I want to delve. Was it a successful show? I think so. And we did a catalog. It's another thing I really believe in. If you're going to do a good show, do a catalog.
I agree.
The show goes away in 6 to 8 weeks, and there's nothing left. But the catalog exists.
Yeah, they're doing a show on Shanto Begay in the Wheelwright, and they're going to do this movie, a 24-minute movie. And I said, well, what about a catalog? And they said, well, we're not doing one. And I said, you've got to do a catalog.
You have to do
You
it.
just got to capture it. The movie's great, wonderful. It's a different thing, but you've got to get one. I said, well, yeah, there's someone has to step up. I'll step up for part of it. Get some other people. Let's do a catalog. That's
what I argued with my board in Cincinnati. Why are you always having to do a catalog? Because I said, you need a record.
Right.
You apply for grants, you need a record. You want to do a traveling show, you need a record. And it doesn't have to be an elaborate catalog. If it's a retrospective, that's one thing. But if it's just a simple show, it could be a small, but it's still a record. I'm a real believer in catalogs. You should see the book that Julie did for the Elaine Horwitz show.
Help pay for it.
It's fabulous.
Because we thought needed a catalog, and it's a book. It's 545.
It's fabulous.
Pages. Yeah, no, it's really
it's fabulous.
It's my bedtime reading.
It's fabulous, and she understands that.
Yeah.
That's why she's a good curator.
Yeah, she is. So, do you enjoy being the art critic? Do you enjoy that process?
I like the challenge of writing about art. I like the challenge of the problem solving. Even like I'm having a difficulty with this Phillips show. I'm trying to find a narrative to talk about it. To just be negative is not beneficial to anybody.
Right.
But to put it in some kind of larger context, to understand, could be a contribution. And I do like the problem solving. I like variety. And there are shows, like I said, I don't want to review.
Do you ever worry about being like, I know the first art curator that curated the first Warhol show wrote this really negative retrospective on it. And, he's kind of stuck with that for the rest of his life.
I don't remember that.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Berger or something to that name.
Where was the show?
I think it was I have to look it up. I remember reading about it, but it was his very first. It was Warhol's very first show. I don't know if it was in the L.A. galleries or if it was a museum show. But do you worry about that you might dish an artist or a show that really turns out to be a pivotal, important show? Or you just can't worry about that stuff?
No, I don't think also, I'm not playing on that stage like the New York Times
Right.
or the LA Times. I think people like Roberta Smith, who I think is an excellent curator, an excellent critic, does engage in very serious problem solving, and she provides in-depth information. And, sometimes she has a dig here and there. I don't think any review should just be a whole negative rant.
Yeah,
I
I
think
agree.
it has to be a lot more. I really believe, people who write, Holland Cotter has his own perspective and aesthetic. He writes well. Christopher Knight in L.A. Sadly, there are not many full-time critics anymore. There's so many of us who write are just freelance. Another great critic in New York who doesn't write as often because of inability to get paid is Kim Levin, who used to be at the Village Voice. No, I don't worry about that. I just I look at each show I want to review as problem solving. I wrote about Kusama. I've done a lot of writing. I love the work of Tony Ursler.
Yeah, he's amazing.
I just think he's fabulous. He's an artist who knows how to meld technology with serious social issues. He was very early to come on with facial recognition.
Right. He almost had this kind of the movie that came out that was about robots. Really, it had that same feel. His things have that same feel.
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah. He's got his pulse on the time.
Yeah.
I've written about David Leventhal's photographs, which I think are fascinating. I just did Turner at the Mystic Seaport.
And what did you write about Turner?
Well, it was a very interesting works on paper show that the Mystic Seaport was able to get from the Tate, and this was the only place they were going to show these works on paper, watercolors. And a couple of my family members were visiting me for Thanksgiving, and they had seen the show prior to coming for the weekend. And they did not like the show, even though they read my article. And I said, you brought your own baggage to the show. You wanted to see the masterpiece.
You wanted the Tate stuff, the big stuff.
But this is the private stuff
Yeah.
from the Tate, which is an evolution of the artist. So you see where he started and how he evolves. And yes, my favorite room was the end because it's exploding with color and abstraction. Yeah, but you're dealing with the man in his late 50s who's been doing this for 40 years. And this is my caution. Don't bring your baggage. Look at what the curator is trying to accomplish. It goes back to saying, okay, I'm going to finish reading that essay about the show at the Phillips. And then I will try to analyze what I saw. But I have to get into the head of the intention. And the bottom line question is, does it work? Or what went wrong? And then you pinpoint that.
And as a viewer, just somebody who hasn't read the review, and it's just a viewer, do they have to get into the head of the curator, or can they just literally go in and the show speaks for itself?
Well, that's another sign of a good show.
Yeah.
If the show can speak for itself, then it's a good show.
Yeah, to me, that is the answer.
I also believe a certain amount of wall text is critically important for the viewer because you have to guide your viewer. Not everyone has an encyclopedic knowledge of what's going on. So having select wall cards becomes your checkpoints. And that helps you. But the bottom line, does that work with what's presented? Or are you too verbose? There are shows. I saw a show in San Diego several years ago at the museum in the park there, Balboa Park.
Mm-hmm.
There was so much text.
It takes away from the imagery.
Well, you were exhausted reading the text. You couldn't look at the art. And after a while, I just looked at the art. I wasn't going to review it, but it was an exhausting experience. So to me, on a lot of work, the intention is more important than what's presented.
And what about audio? You know, now there's apps you can have on your iPhone. You can listen to it. What's your take on the audio presentation of work?
Some people need that. For me, I want to first experience it. I don't want to be told.
Yeah.
If I hear docents in a gallery, I go the other way. I want to first have the experience.
Yeah, I agree. I've gone to some shows where they're trying to force the things on me to listen to it. And it's like, no, I want to look at the art. You know?
Well, you might go back and then...
Right.
Then...
yeah, take it in.
Take it in. But it also is very much important today, and I think museums, in the past, failed to acknowledge the diversity of audience. Some curators and museums assumed we're only talking to this group. No, if you want to have a diversified audience, then you have to acknowledge that. So audio tapes, docents, all that's important.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just assume you've got this small group. You have to say, okay, how open can we be to a large, diverse audience?
Though I do think if you go to almost any major museum now and you look and watch, and I've taken photos because I find it so fascinating, no one's looking at the art. They're all either taking selfies or photos of it, or they're listening to the audio and they're not actually absorbing the art.
Because we've become accustomed to that.
Yeah.
People have become accustomed to that. And the selfie thing, the Kusama show at the Hirshhorn became a joke. Now, the work was fabulous, but the audience came there to take selfies in those special light rooms.
Right.
No one was looking at her drawings. It was the happening event, which brought droves of people into that museum. For the museum, it's great. But were they looking? No.
And maybe that's where some of the museums are headed now. We have the Museum of Ice Cream and different things as well, right? Maybe we're looking just for experiential. This next group of people that are coming through, the next generation, they want the experiential.
Well, I think you have to acknowledge each generation. See, I think you can't project just your own baggage. I think you have to say, okay, X, Y are accustomed to this. How do I keep a serious environment? How do I engage them in a dialogue? But you can't be oblivious as a curator anymore because the times have changed, or as the saying goes, times are changing.
We know what that means, but nobody else.
but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
what do you got?
A good curator acknowledges, and I think good curators today work with their education department. More and more museums realize it's a team effort. And I had a wonderful experience curating a show at the Museum of Art in San Juan, Puerto Rico, of a painter named Mari Mater O'Neill. And she wanted me as her guest curator. The museum agreed to it. They brought me down, and we had this wonderful round table discussion with the director, the artist, the education curator, the media people, the press people, the installation people, the fundraising people. We all engaged in a dialogue for hours. And before I even picked one picture, everything began to get hashed around. Who needed what? What about this? And how could you do that?
And what role did the artist have in that?
The artists had a lot of role.
Well, I know. That's my question. Were they leading it really?
No, the artist was complicated because she was getting ready to stop being a painter. She ended up leaving being a visual artist in that sense and got a PhD in communication and design and has evolved, very creative person, Mari Mater. And she was very concerned with the installation. And I hired a former student of mine who was an architect to design that show because we wanted it not to be chronological. We wanted it thematic.
I prefer those shows personally.
Yeah, and we worked she was very interested in working closely with Andrew Caruso, who designed the installation. And it was fabulous how he just changed this open, cavernous gallery into this exciting place by creating corridors, changing the color of paint as you moved from section to section, how you changed the light.
Mm-hmm.
And politically, we also made collectors happy because there was only so much room and this woman was so prolific. So we had also a virtual slideshow going on the wall continuously of other works that we could not put into the show.
Did you do a catalog?
We did an immense catalog, yes.
So now you've been doing this for 50 years plus as an artist.
No, I'd
well,
say
1966 you get a...
No, I'm in high school then.
But that's when you graduated, right? So,
but I haven't been doing curating till the
Not
late
curating.
70s.
I don't mean curating. I mean just art, being involved in the art world. Getting your first degree as an art historian. That was, I guess, in 70.
Yes, but I
30 plus 20, 50.
Yeah, but I don't think I was active then. I think I was studying. I think when you're studying, it's different than doing.
It's but you've been involved. Let's just say you've been involved in this for a very long time.
Yes.
Where do you see this going in the next generation, the next 25 years? I don't think you can hardly see past something like that. But where do you see the art world in general going?
Oof.
I know it's a very tough question, and it's almost impossible to answer. But at the same time, I think you have the pulse for sure on contemporary art. And, in my field of Western art, I see things changing and evolving to a more modern aesthetic. I see that. I see it. I see video becoming much more important. And so I just would like to get your take of where you see things headed.
I think on one hand, I like the fact that museums are more open to diverse audience and inclusion. I am really happy to see that. I'm happy to see more women artists getting recognized.
Yeah, like the Baltimore Art Museum, only collecting women artists this whole year.
Well, and I think those are positive things.
I do too.
I worry about going too far with inclusion at the cost of quality. Now, I know that's an old-fashioned word, but I still believe in it. I feel we're in a very strange era right now, besides crisis on many fronts. I worry. I call things sometimes flat. I see a few really creative artists, or like I really got into Shoplifter's work. I mean, I knew of her, but I had never experienced her work.
Mm-hmm.
I feel the arts, and I blame part of the market for this, The art market is off the rails. There were some articles recently in the New York Times about these schemes. There was this young man, I forget his last name, who created like almost a Ponzi scheme with buying and selling and lying. And what people are doing is picking, like, I call it the top 40.
Right.
And then we push and pull those artists. And yet there's so many creative people who do not get recognized.
I do think that's in every field, though. I don't think it's just art. Music, literature,
right.
You name it, acting. There's always those top group, that tier, whether they're deserving of being the A-list actor or the.
Correct.
So I do see that. I mean, the John Gershons of the world make 90% of all the book royalties, and the people who are winning American Book Awards can't make a living.
Yeah, and I think the only people, I think, who could help shows, and of course it's very difficult because it goes back to money, it goes back to boards, are curators to take risks. I'm just getting to know the arts here in Tucson. I like Tucson a lot. Mm-hmm. And I like the diversity of types of people who live here, and there's an energy here. The people who are trying to do Sculpture Tucson.
Right.
People like Barbara, I can never pronounce her last name, Jeff at Hacienda del Sol.
Yeah,
and
we're going to have Jeff on, actually, and
Jeff
talk
Titan.
about that. Mm-hmm.
Is it Titan?
Yeah.
These are people very committed, but also the artists who are here. Let's say like Moira Joffrian. There's a young woman who lives in South Tucson named Amy Novelli. She's a great painter. You should see her work. But she's mostly unknown. She shows at the airport sometimes. But these are artists who don't want to play the international game.
Or can't, to some extent.
But they like living here.
Oh, yeah. No, for sure.
They don't want to leave here.
That's right. People want to live here in Tucson.
But we had great artists in the Midwest. Grant Wood was not a bumpkin.
Mm-hmm.
Charles Birchfield was not a bumpkin.
Thomas Benton. These people all studied seriously, spent time in Paris, spent time in New York, and made a choice to go back to where they wanted to live. Right, including Maynard Dixon, who spent, from 1907 to 1912 in New York City and said, I can't take it anymore. I'm going back to San Francisco. So
I think curators can play a very important role if they really, what I call, would be on the hunt, but open. You have to be open to see. You can't have blinders on. And what I mean by that, just seeing what's popular, what other people are popular, think is popular, what is the in. And I know these are hard things to do. But I think until we can see beyond these boundaries, even though people purport the inclusive, they're still
exclusive.
Yeah. So I'm glad where I am now in my life. Do I curate? I haven't curated a show for a while. I just wrote an essay in a very exciting book called Cast. I think Jennifer Townsend and this other author, you can find it on Amazon, put together this amazing book on the history of how casting throughout time has been very important to artists. And even in this age of technology and change, there are serious artists still doing casting. And that was an exciting project to be in. So, projects sort of appear, and it's exciting how people find you to do them because they know who you are and what you stand for.
And you have all that experience.
Yeah, and I never tried to be popular. I had a successful run being director of the Carnegie-Mellon Art Gallery. We showed a lot of great people. The late Bob Dodds, who used to live in Santa Fe, a lawyer who was chairman of my board in Pittsburgh, was fantastic to work with. Bob Dodds was a passionate collector of contemporary art, was very open to people of all kinds. I just think we have to get people to get excited and not create recipes.
Well, clearly, Elaine, you are very excited. And we appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us today. It was very fascinating. I really never had spoken to an art critic yet. And there were some questions there that I really didn't understand how you go about doing something and what are the ramifications when you do them. And I have a better insight into that now.
Well, you shouldn't write criticism if you want to have a fan club.
There you go. I think that should be a T-shirt right there.
Oh, you shouldn't. And then my father was a wise man. He used to say, if you put your head out there, you could get something thrown at it. And it's true. But you do it because you have conviction. And I like this morning on the news, there was a description about Governor Andrew Cuomo. And they said, in this time of crisis, fortunately, this is a man who is decisive, who knows how to be proactive, who knows how to listen, and takes scientific knowledge seriously.
Yes. And with that, we're keeping our social distancing on Art Dealer Diaries.
Perfect.
So thank you so much for coming out. It's kind of a difficult time in the world, but it's always enlightening to have art, to think about art, to talk about art, to try to understand different points of view that you may not. And that's really the basis of why we're in this profession.
Well, thank you. I feel very honored to be part of your ongoing podcast. And I think your gallery is great, and I think you're a fascinating person. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, we'll just use that as her review right there.
Oh, thank you.
All right, Art Dealer Diaries. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope I get to see it.
Oh, you will. You definitely will.
I hope you got enough.
Oh yeah, I've got your email, and it was delightful. We need your support for the Medicine Man Gallery channel, so make sure to click the subscribe button and tap the little bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video, which we do every morning on Wednesday and Friday. See you soon.